For well over 100 years, there's been a commonality when it comes to deaths by firearms in America specifically. For well over 100 years, there's been a common caliber that, if you know somebody or heard of a shooting from really about 1900 to about 2000, chances are they were shot with the .22 LR, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily because from the late 1800s on, it was wildly popular, extremely affordable, very lightweight, very affordable firearms. And around the 1960s, 1970s, there was a wealth of really cheap Saturday night special handguns that were mostly in .22 LRs. So this was a gun that people liked to carry through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And it really wasn't until about 2000 that there started to become more of a wealth of other types of firearms that are smaller and more concealable, as well as I believe that most people carried .22 LRs because they were tiny, but most people carried them illegally. For the longest time, you just couldn't freely carry a gun in the United States. It's just more recently that that's more of a freedom, at least in where I'm from. And it was around 2000 that we saw this transition from kind of everybody carrying cheap .22 LR Saturday night specials illegally to legally carrying smaller 9mm handguns. And that changed everything. The 9mm has surpassed the .22 LR as being the deadliest caliber in America. So let's take a look at why. Well, again, a lot of it comes down to affordability of the smaller 9mm handguns, because it was around 2000 that Glock kind of really started to surprise America, let's say. Kind of people started to make note of these polymer handguns. And everybody started making cheap polymer handguns. I don't want to say they're cheap. They're just very inexpensive, tiny little 9mm handguns. And they became one of the most stolen guns on the planet. They became one of the most desired guns by criminals on the planet. They became one of the most desired concealed carrier guns on the planet. They became one of the most desired police sidearms on the planet, the most desired military sidearms on the planet. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on about the popularity of the 9mm. But here's what we're really looking at is that once people kind of did away with the cheap Saturday night specials and started replacing them with micro compact 9mm handguns, well, I guess not micro 9mm, but subcompact 9mm. Micro 9s are a little more recent. But from about 2011 on, what you have when it comes to shootings, and there's not an exact science to tracking the caliber of bullets that people are getting shot by. Many shootings go without revealing what caliber they are, but most do have some sort of record on what caliber it was. And really what we're looking at from 2011 on average, you're looking at 45% of shootings in America, both lethal and non-lethal, are 9mm. If you're going to get shot, there's a 45% chance that you're going to get shot with a 9mm. And it vastly surpasses everything else. You might think, well, 45%, that's not a very big number, but it's the biggest piece of the pie of all the calibers is 45% 9mm. The next one down is 10%, 40 Smith & Wesson. So everything else is less than 10%, 45% is 9mm. So you got 45% of shootings take place with 9mm, 10% 40 Smith & Wesson. Then below it is 7% .22 LR, 6% 45 ACP, 3% is the combined 5.56 and 223. So these are our first rifle calibers that we see on this list. And then 2% is 38 special. Then everything else kind of takes a 1% or less piece of that pie. But it's not that somebody's necessarily saying, well, I want to go carry a gun that's 9mm. It's really the capacity, the quality, the power, because if you look at the weapons purchased, really 67% of guns used in crimes are handguns. And 55% of those handguns are 9mm. And it's because people are after really that sort of thing. They're after the smaller, more powerful, more capacity handguns than those little 22 LRs. And if you look at any major city, which is where most of the shootings are taking place, let's just get real about it. In Boston, what you're looking at is 65% of their shootings take place with 9mm. New York City, 70%. Kansas City, 70%. Like, this is how this plays out, is criminals are seeking after these guns. They're the most common stolen gun. They're the most common carried gun. They're the most common used gun. Like, it is the 9mm now, and we just have to kind of, because you still see, I guarantee if I posted the question, what's the most common caliber that kills Americans, most people would say the 22 LR, and that was the case, really until 2011. Because again, I want to remind you, it wasn't until 2000 that finally guns like the Glock became popular. And even then, you were mostly dealing with like bigger guns, like Glock 17s, SIG 226s. If you got a compact gun, it was probably more of a duty, kind of not like a subcompact, but something slightly small, like a Glock 19, for example. And people didn't really, they started to carry those more, but it was the desirability of those tiny little Saturday night special guns slowly started to go away as things like the Ruger LC9 came out, and these single stack tiny little 9mm started to become more prevalent with the polymer grips. Suddenly people, it made more sense. Like, why would I want a 6-shot 22 LR when I can have a 6-shot 9mm and it's the exact same size, if not even smaller in some cases of those single stacks? And that is truly at the heart of why the 9mm is the deadliest caliber of bullet right now in America. It's the most carried by law-abiding citizens. It's the most carried by police. It's the most carried by criminals. It's the most stolen gun. It's the most carried by military. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on, but it is the 9mm. So let's just get the rumor that it's still the 22R, because for over 100 years, who wants the 22R? But not anymore. Now it's the 9mm. So be careful out there. Chances are, if you're putting a gun on your hip, it's a 9mm today. So be careful out in the world. Any thoughts or insight on any of this? Definitely put it below. I do want to take a moment and say most people watch the channel, hey, they're not subscribers. Click that subscribe button. It greatly increases the algorithm and our ability to get these messages out. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests. So please don't ever, ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, love guns.